In the vast expanse of space, where countless civilizations had risen and fallen, there existed a legend, a tale of an ancient fleet that drifted through the cosmic winds like ghosts of a forgotten era. The story began when our deep space exploration vessel, the Stellar Horizon, stumbled upon what appeared to be a graveyard of massive warships, their hulls bearing the scars of battles fought millennia ago. I remember standing on the bridge that day, my hand trembling as I held the initial scan results. As Chief Archaeological Officer, I'd seen my share of incredible discoveries, but this was different. The ships stretched for kilometers, their dark silhouettes blocking out distant stars like an artificial constellation. Our alien colleagues, particularly the Zenri with their supposed technological superiority, couldn't hide their amusement at our excitement. Primitive vessels, they said, their crystalline eyes gleaming with what I can only describe as patronizing pity, barely worthy of study, clearly constructed by a species that died out before mastering basic quantum mechanics. Their laughter echoed through our ship's common area, a sound that would soon come back to haunt them. We spent weeks documenting the fleet, mapping every curve and analyzing every piece of debris. The Zenri delegation mostly kept to themselves, occasionally emerging to remind us how we were wasting our time. But then Dr. Chen found something in the command center of what we assumed was the flagship, a simple leather-bound book, perfectly preserved in a vacuum-sealed chamber. My heart nearly stopped when we translated the first page. The text was in an ancient form of English, the kind used centuries before humanity reached for the stars. The date stamp made no sense. It predated our official space age by almost 200 years. But there it was, written in faded ink, property of the United Earth Naval Forces, Pacific Division. The laughter stopped that day. I'll never forget the look on Ambassador Krau's face when we presented our findings. The Zenri's crystalline features, usually so composed, seemed to crack with disbelief. These weren't just any ancient vessels, they were human vessels. Our ancestors had achieved what many thought impossible, building a fleet capable of interstellar travel long before we were supposed to have mastered such technology. As we delved deeper into the ship's databases, slowly bringing ancient systems back online, we uncovered more shocking truths. These weren't simply warships. They were carrying something far more valuable, something that could reshape our understanding of human history and our place among the stars. But with each revelation came new questions and darker implications. The Zenri's amusement had turned to barely concealed fear. They began monitoring our every move, sending encrypted messages back to their homeworld. Whatever our ancestors had hidden within this fleet had them deeply worried, and perhaps they had good reason to be. Yesterday, we managed to power up the flagship's main computer core. As the ancient screens flickered to life, displaying messages from centuries past, we realized we'd stumbled upon something far bigger than a mere archaeological find. The fleet hadn't been abandoned. It had been waiting for the right moment, the right people, to rediscover its purpose. The last entry in the captain's log mentioned something called Project Awakening. The details were encrypted, but one line stood clear. When humanity is ready, they will find us. And when they do, everything will change. As I record this log, our team is preparing to breach the sealed vault we discovered deep within the flagship's heart. Whatever lies behind those ancient doors, one thing is certain: we humans have been underestimated for far too long. And maybe, just maybe, our ancestors left us the keys to prove it. The vault doors groaned open with a hiss of ancient hydraulics, releasing a burst of preserved atmosphere that hadn't been disturbed for centuries. Our environmental suit's sensors immediately began analyzing the composition. Pure, filtered air, somehow maintained all these years. The engineering behind such a feat was beyond even our current capabilities. The Zenri ambassador had demanded to be present for the opening, though I noticed his usual entourage had dwindled to just 2 guards. Their crystalline forms seemed to vibrate with tension as we stepped into the chamber. The room itself was surprisingly small, perhaps 20 meters square, with walls lined in what appeared to be data storage units. But it was the central pedestal that drew everyone's attention. A hologram flickered to life as we approached, displaying the image of a woman in a naval uniform I didn't recognize. Her features were sharp, determined, and her eyes held the weight of someone who had seen too much. "If you're viewing this message," she began, "then humanity has finally found its way back to the stars. I am Admiral Sarah Chen, and what I'm about to tell you will sound impossible." The name sent shockwaves through our team. Dr. Chen, who had found the book, stumbled backward. That's my great-great-grandmother," she whispered, "but she was recorded as having died in a research accident in 2082. How could she be here?" The hologram continued, unaware of our shock. "In 2081, we made first contact. Not the official first contact recorded in your history books. Something else. Something that made us realize humanity wasn't ready for the truth about what exists out here. We discovered technology that could have advanced our civilization by centuries, but we also found something terrifying." Ambassador Krull moved closer to the hologram, his crystalline form reflecting the blue light in scattered patterns across the walls. I noticed his guards' hands hovering near their weapons. They knew something they weren't sharing. The precursors, as we called them, left warnings scattered across the galaxy. Admiral Chen's hologram explained. Warnings about a cycle of civilization that repeats every few thousand years. We weren't the first to find these warnings, but we were among the few who chose to act on them. This fleet, Project Awakening, was our response. The hologram shifted, showing star maps and technical diagrams that made even our most advanced systems look primitive by comparison. We knew humanity needed time to develop naturally, to build strength through its own achievements. So we hid this fleet, along with everything we discovered. We scattered ourselves across the stars, establishing hidden outposts, gathering intelligence, and waiting. Dr. Chen stepped forward, her voice shaking. "The research accident. It wasn't an accident, was it? They disappeared on purpose." The hologram seemed to smile, almost as if it had anticipated the question. "But now," the Admiral continued, "the cycle is beginning again. The signs are already there for those who know where to look. The Zenri." At this, Ambassador Krull made a sudden movement toward the hologram controls, but our security team was faster, their weapons trained on him instantly. "The Zenri know." Admiral Chen's voice grew harder. "They've known all along. Ask them about the darkness at the edge of their territory. Ask them about the ships that disappear without a trace. Ask them about the signals they've been detecting for the past 50 years. The ambassador's crystalline form had lost its luster, turning almost opaque with what I could only interpret as fear. But before we could question him, the hologram revealed one final image, a massive structure, unlike anything I'd ever seen, floating in the void between galaxies. And suddenly, all those encrypted files we'd found, all those weapon systems we'd assumed were for conventional warfare, made terrible sense. "Welcome to Project Awakening," Admiral Chen said. "Humanity's insurance policy against extinction. And now, it's time for you to understand why we built it." Ambassador Krull's voice cut through the tense silence, his crystalline form now pulsing with an ominous red glow. "Your ancestors were fools to interfere," he spat. "The cycle cannot be broken. It cannot be stopped. We accepted this truth ends ago." His guards raised their weapons, but there was fear in their movements, not the confidence of superior beings we'd grown accustomed to. Dr. Chen's hands flew across the holographic controls, her grandmother's research flowing through her fingers like muscle memory. "The fleet's systems are coming online," she announced, her voice steady despite the chaos. "Whatever our ancestors built, it's still functional, still waiting." Through the viewport, we watched in awe as ancient engines began to pulse with life, casting a blue glow across the starfield. The hologram shifted again, showing what looked like sensor readings from the edge of known space. Dark shapes moved against the backdrop of stars, massive forms that defied natural laws. "We tracked them for decades," Admiral Chen's voice explained. "The harvesters, as we called them. They don't invade, they harvest. Entire civilizations, stripped down to their base elements, their knowledge and technology absorbed. The Zenri didn't just know about them. They'd struck a deal." Ambassador Krull's laughter echoed through the chamber, a sound like breaking glass. "Of course we did. Better to survive as servants than perish as heroes. When they return, and they are returning, we will be spared. We have proved our worth through our technological achievements, while humanity, he gestured dismissively. You were supposed to remain primitive, negligible. Instead, your ancestors built this. Suddenly, alarms blared throughout the fleet. Dr. Chen's face went pale as she read the incoming data. Multiple objects just dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of the system, she reported. They're massive, each one larger than Earth's moon, and they're accelerating toward us. The sensor readings matched perfectly with the ancient warnings. The harvesters had arrived ahead of schedule. The Zenri guards lowered their weapons, their fear replaced with something like resignation. But Ambassador Kral's expression showed something else. Triumph. You see, he said, it doesn't matter what your ancestors built. The cycle continues. The strong survive by serving, the weak are harvested. That is the natural order. But Admiral Chen's hologram remained unperturbed, almost smiling. Project Awakening was never about the fleet, she said. The ships, the technology, they were a beacon, a lure. We knew the harvesters would detect them eventually, that the Zenri would try to stop humanity from claiming their inheritance. Everything proceeding exactly as we planned centuries ago. Dr. Chen's eyes widened as she decoded more of her grandmother's files. The truth about Project Awakening began to emerge, and I watched her expression shift from shock to understanding, and finally to a fierce pride. The same look I'd seen in her grandmother's hologram. The fleet's not powering up for battle, she whispered. It's powering up for something else, something bigger. Through the viewport, we could see more ancient systems awakening, patterns of light spreading across the ships like constellations coming alive. The harvesters were coming, yes, but humanity had spent centuries preparing for this moment. The hologram of Admiral Chen raised her hand, and in response, every screen in the vault lit up with a countdown. Now, she said, you'll understand why we chose this location, why we needed these specific ships in this specific formation. The harvesters aren't the only ones who can reshape reality. As the countdown ticked away, as the massive shapes of the harvesters grew larger in our sensors, I realized we were about to witness the true legacy of humanity's hidden pioneers. The question wasn't whether we would survive, it was what we would become in the process. The countdown reached 0, and for a moment, everything went silent. The ancient fleet began to move, not away from the approaching harvesters, but into a precise geometric pattern we'd seen in Admiral Chen's technical diagrams. That's when we noticed something extraordinary. The space between the ships was beginning to bend, creating visible distortions in the star field behind them. Your ancestors, Ambassador Kral said, his voice trembling, they didn't just discover harvester technology. They found something else, didn't they? Something older. The fear in his voice had transformed into awe. Dr. Chen nodded, her fingers still dancing across the holographic controls as she completed the sequence her grandmother had begun centuries ago. The harvesters weren't the first advanced civilization, she explained, reading from the decoded files. They were just the most recent winners of a game that's been played since the beginning of time. But before them, before everything, there were the architects. The void between the ships continued to twist, forming what looked like a massive lens in space itself. Admiral Chen's hologram expanded, filling the chamber with images of impossibly advanced structures. The architects didn't build ships or weapons, she continued. They built reality itself. The harvesters found their tools and learned to break things down. Humanity found their tools and learned to build things up. That's what Project Awakening really is, not a weapon, but a key. The harvester ships were closing in, their massive forms now visible to the naked eye through the viewport. They were organic and mechanical at the same time, like mountains that had learned to think. But instead of firing weapons, they had stopped, as if confused by what they were witnessing. The Zenri weren't wrong to fear us, Dr. Chen said, her voice filled with newfound confidence. But not because of our weapons or our ships. They feared us because we did what no other species had done before. We learned to think like the architects. The space between the ancient fleet had become a swirling vortex of energy, growing larger by the second. Suddenly, a new alarm blared, different from the others. Dr. Chen's expression shifted from triumph to concern. Something's wrong, she announced. The power readings. They're far beyond what the simulations predicted. The reaction is self-sustaining, growing exponentially. The vortex had begun to pulse with colors that shouldn't exist in our reality. Admiral Chen's hologram flickered, showing signs of damage that hadn't been there before. "If you're seeing this warning," she said, her voice distorted, "then the unthinkable has happened. The architect's key isn't just opening a door, it's shattering the lock." The ship began to vibrate, metal groaning under forces it was never designed to withstand. Ambassador Krall rushed to the viewport, his crystalline form reflecting the impossible colors of the vortex. "By all the stars," he whispered, "your ancestors didn't build a weapon against the harvesters. They built a way to rewrite the laws of physics themselves. But they couldn't control it, could they? That's why they left it here, waiting for humanity to evolve enough to understand it." Through the chaos, I noticed something in the hologram's data stream, a hidden message, encrypted differently from the others. As I decoded it, my blood ran cold. These weren't just technical specifications or historical records. They were a warning, written in Admiral Chen's personal logs, about what would happen if the key was ever used at full power. The harvesters had begun to retreat, their massive forms turning away from the growing vortex. They knew something we didn't. Something that made even these ancient, unstoppable beings flee in terror. As reality itself buckled around us, I realized we hadn't just found humanity's greatest triumph. We found its greatest test. And somewhere in the depths of space-time, something ancient stirred, awakened by the key we just turned. The encrypted warning in Admiral Chen's personal logs became clear as the vortex reached its critical point. "The architects didn't vanish," I read aloud, my voice barely audible over the groaning metal. "They evolved. They became living mathematics, pure thought given form. And they left their tools behind as a test, not of our technology, but of our wisdom." Dr. Chen's hands moved with desperate precision across the controls. "We can't shut it down," she announced, "but we can direct it." The vortex had grown to encompass the entire fleet, its impossible colors painting the void like an artist gone mad. The harvesters had vanished completely, leaving us alone with whatever we'd awakened. Then we saw them. Through the vortex came shapes that defied description, geometric patterns that thought, mathematical equations given life. The architects hadn't been waiting for someone to find their tools. They'd been waiting for someone to understand why they'd left them behind. Ambassador Krall fell to his knees, his crystalline form resonating with frequencies we couldn't perceive. "All this time," he whispered, "the Zenri thought survival meant serving the strongest power. We never considered that true power might mean choosing not to use it at all." The hologram of Admiral Chen smiled, and for the first time, I noticed something different in her expression. Not pride or determination, but hope. "The key was never meant to be used as a weapon," she said. "It was meant to show us what we could become, and then ask us what we would choose to be." Through the swirling chaos of the vortex, the architects communicated not in words but in pure understanding. They showed us visions of countless civilizations that had found their tools, civilizations that had chosen dominance over wisdom, power over purpose. The harvesters were just the latest in a long line of species that had failed the test. Dr. Chen's eyes widened as she decoded the final part of her grandmother's message. "There's a failsafe," she said, "a way to close the vortex, but it requires—" She paused, looking at the Zenri ambassador. "It requires both human and Zenri input. Our ancestors didn't just build this place to test humanity's wisdom. They built it to test our ability to trust." The ship's systems were failing, reality itself tearing at the seams around us. Ambassador Krall stood, his crystalline form now pulsing with a light that matched the vortex. "Your ancestors," he said, "they knew this moment would come. They knew we would have to choose, together." In those final moments, as Dr. Chen and Ambassador Krall worked in perfect synchronization to activate the failsafe, I understood the true genius of Project Awakening. It was never about winning a war or gaining power. It was about proving we were ready to join something greater than ourselves. The vortex collapsed, but not before the architects left us with one final gift: knowledge. Not of weapons or technology, but of possibilities. They showed us a future where humanity and the Zenri stood together, not as servants or masters, but as guardians of something precious: wisdom. As the ancient fleet powered down for the last time, its purpose finally fulfilled, Ambassador Krell turned to us. "We must tell them," he said. "Tell all of them. The harvesters, the other races, there's a better way." Dr. Chen nodded, holding up a data crystal that contained everything we learned. But in the depths of space, where the vortex had closed, a single point of light remained. A reminder that the architects were still watching, still waiting. Humanity had passed their test, but they had left us with a choice. What would we do with the wisdom we'd gained? The real test, I realized, wasn't in finding their tools or understanding their power. It was in what we would choose to build with it. And somewhere, in the endless expanse of space, I swear I could hear Admiral Chen laughing. 6 months after our encounter with the architects, I stood before the United Earth Council, watching as Dr. Chen and Ambassador Krall presented our findings to representatives from every known spacefaring civilization. The harvesters, as we learned, had returned to their own space, fundamentally changed by what they'd witnessed. The cycle of harvest and destruction that had dominated our galaxy for millennia was finally broken, not through force, but through understanding. The ancient fleet remained where we found it, now serving as a memorial and a school. Scientists and philosophers from across the galaxy came to study not just the technology, but the wisdom our ancestors had preserved. The Zenri, once so proud of their technological superiority, became our most dedicated partners in understanding the architect's legacy. Dr. Chen's grandmother's personal logs revealed more than just technical specifications. They told the story of a group of humans who had seen two possible futures, one of endless conflict and one of infinite possibility. They chose to hide their discoveries not out of fear, but out of hope that humanity would evolve enough to understand the responsibility that came with such knowledge. The data crystal we recovered contained something even more remarkable than advanced technology. It held the combined cultural and scientific knowledge of countless civilizations that had risen and fallen throughout our galaxy's history. The architects hadn't just left us tools. They'd left us a library of everything that had come before, trusting that we would learn from both the triumphs and mistakes of the past. Ambassador Krall, now the head of the newly formed Galactic Cultural Exchange, often reminded us of something profound. The greatest technology in the universe, he would say, is the ability to choose wisdom over power. His crystalline form had changed since our encounter, occasionally showing hints of those impossible colors we'd seen in the vortex, a permanent reminder of how close we'd come to unraveling reality itself. The point of light that remained in space where the vortex had closed became known as the architect's eye. It neither grew nor diminished, serving as a constant reminder that we were being watched, not as subjects of an experiment, but as children taking their first steps into a larger universe. Some say that on quiet nights, when the stars align just right, you can see patterns in its light, equations dancing in the void, sending messages to those wise enough to understand them. As for me, I kept Admiral Chen's original book in my office, its pages now carefully preserved for future generations. Sometimes, late at night, I would open it and read her final entry. To those who find this fleet, remember that the greatest discoveries in human history weren't the ones that gave us power over others, but the ones that helped us understand ourselves. The architects didn't leave us their tools because they wanted us to become them. They left them because they wanted us to choose who we would become. The ancient fleet still orbits silently through space, its purpose transformed from a weapon that never was to a beacon of what humanity could achieve. Every now and then, new symbols appear in its systems, messages from the architects, watching as we take our first tentative steps into a future they helped us imagine. They say the true measure of a civilization isn't in its technology or its conquests, but in the wisdom it chooses to embrace. Humanity, against all odds and expectations, had proven itself worthy of that wisdom. And as I watch ships from 100 worlds dock at the fleet's academic stations, their crews coming together to learn and share and grow, I understand what Admiral Chen and her team had known all along. The greatest power in the universe isn't the ability to reshape reality. It's the wisdom to know when not to. After all, they didn't laugh at the ancient fleet for long.